They cheated me, mocked my failure, but they didn't know I owned the company I just fired them from. They say life has a funny way of bringing things full circle, but this wasn't funny. Not to me anyway. To them though, oh, it was hilarious. I sat on the leather couch in Tom's pristine modern house, nursing a glass of water, pretending to be unbothered by the snide remarks and laughter swirling around me. Tom, Sophia's new husband, was in his element, surrounded by his hand-picked circle of elitists, all basking in their self-importance. And then there was me, the uninvited guest, the pity case, the ex-husband still struggling to get his life together. At least, that's what they thought. Sophia had invited me, though not out of kindness. No, she wanted one last moment of satisfaction, a final nail in the coffin of our past. Tom wanted to mark his territory, to make it clear that he had won, that he had replaced me with a better, wealthier version of himself. So I played along. I let them see me in the most awkward corner of the room. I let them pretend I didn't belong here. I let them mock me, pick at my supposed failures, laugh about how I never amounted to much. What they didn't know was that I owned them, not in the way they owned their fancy sports cars or designer watches. No, I owned them in the way a spider owns a fly trapped in its web, patiently, quietly, and completely. But they had no clue. I had barely taken a sip of my drink before Tom took center stage, shifting the conversation to me, a smirk creeping across his smug, perfect face. "Daniel, tell us, what is it you do these days?" His voice dripped with false curiosity, like I was a charity case he felt obligated to entertain. Sophia laughed first, the same laugh I had heard 1,000 times before. "Kay's still figuring it out," she said, swirling her wine like she was some kind of goddess granting me mercy. The room erupted in laughter. Greg, one of Tom's business partners, leaned forward, barely masking his amusement. "Still unemployed?" He grinned. "Oh man, that's rough. I don't know how you manage. I'd go crazy if I didn't have a reason to get up in the morning." More laughter. Angela, his wife, snorted into her drink. "Sophia, you're too nice. If it were me, I'd be embarrassed to have an ex still loitering around without a job." I forced a weak smile, not like I was part of the joke, like I wasn't silently memorizing every word. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, the itch in my fingers to end this game right now, to watch their faces morph from mockery to sheer horror. But not yet. Tom leaned back, basking in his own superiority, his arms slung lazily over the back of the couch as he sighed dramatically. "You know," he said, his voice carrying that obnoxious brand of confidence only the truly ignorant possess, "I keep telling Sophia she really dodged a bullet." The room erupted in cruel laughter again. I clenched my jaw, my grip tightening around the glass in my hand, but I kept my face carefully blank. Tom wasn't done. "I mean, no offense, Daniel," he continued, smirking like he was doing me a favor. But it must be hard knowing she upgraded. Must be tough watching her move on with someone who can actually take care of her." Sophia smirked, sipping her wine. She didn't even look at me. Greg chuckled. "Oh, damn, Tom, that's cold." Angela nudged Sophia playfully. "How do you do it? I would have blocked my ex a long time ago." "Cheeto, he's harmless," Sophia said, pretending to be generous, like she was too good to be bitter. "It's just sad, really. I mean, he tried his best, but some men just don't have what it takes to make it." I let the words sink in. I let them laugh. I let Tom look at me like a king looking down at a peasant. I let Sophia bask in the attention. I let their friends enjoy the show. But inside, I was smiling. Because Tom's successful company, it was mine. Because Greg's position, I gave it to him. Because Angela's promotions, I signed off on them. Because the house they were all sitting in, the luxury, the comfort, the privilege, it existed because I allowed it to exist. They thought they were laughing at a nobody, at a man who had failed. They had no idea they were laughing at their boss. The final blow came when Tom raised his glass, grinning like he had just delivered a punchline worthy of a standing ovation. "On to Sophia," he toasted. "So far finally getting the man she deserves." Sophia beamed. The room clinked their glasses together, their smiles wide, their delusion intact. I lifted my own glass slightly, nodding, the perfect image of the defeated ex-husband, the laughingstock of the night. But inside, I was counting down the hours. Less than 12 hours until they walked into my office, thinking it was just another day at work. Less than 12 hours until their world came crashing down. Let them laugh tonight, because tomorrow, they wouldn't have anything left to laugh about. I didn't need to be a mind reader to know exactly what they thought of me. To them, I was the failure, the washed-up ex-husband who couldn't keep a job, the man Sophia had the good sense to leave behind. In their minds, Tom was my superior in every possible way, the man who provided for her, the man with the business acumen and financial power I supposedly lacked. And their little circle of elitists? They saw me as an outsider, a joke, someone to be pitied and condescended to. They had no idea they were standing on a chessboard I'd been setting up for years. Every single job title, every office promotion, every so-called power move they thought they had earned had been signed off by me. Their entire world was a carefully crafted illusion, and I was its architect. It hadn't always been like this. Years ago, I was just another ambitious entrepreneur trying to make something out of nothing. My father had been cheated out of his own business, a small electronics repair shop, when a group of corporate raiders bought him out for pennies and shut him down overnight. I watched him lose everything, and I swore no one would ever do that to me. So I taught myself everything: finance, business law, software development, strategy. I spent years working behind the scenes, gaining power without revealing my hand. By the time I turned 28, I had launched Summit Innovations, a company that started with small software solutions but quickly grew into a tech powerhouse. By 30, I was quietly acquiring smaller companies. By 35, I had built a global empire. But the key to real power isn't just wealth or influence, it's patience. It's letting people think they're winning while you pull the strings from the shadows. And that's exactly what I did. Sophia never knew. When we met, I was already wealthy, but I never let her see it. I drove an old car, dressed in modest clothes, and let her believe I was still trying to find my place in the world. She encouraged me at first, telling me I would figure things out. But the moment she realized I wasn't climbing the corporate ladder the way she wanted, the cracks began to show. Sophia didn't want a partner. She wanted a man she could mold into her idea of success. When she didn't get that, her support turned into ridicule. She started belittling me in private, making comments about my lack of ambition. Then it escalated. She began doing it in front of friends, using me as a punchline at dinner parties. By the time she left me, she had convinced herself that she was the one who had built our life, that she had moved on to a man worthy of her status. Tom, the so-called business mogul, the man who didn't even realize his entire company operated under mine. I hadn't just built an empire, I had constructed an entire ecosystem, one where I could monitor the people closest to me without them ever knowing. When Sophia left me for Tom, I didn't just sit back and accept it. I started buying out the businesses Tom depended on. I acquired the firms that provided his company with software. I secured silent controlling interest in the banks that financed his real estate ventures. Bit by bit, without him ever realizing it, I made sure Summit Innovations had the power to control his company's fate. And Tom's friends, the same people who laughed at me last night, they all worked for me. Melissa, who mocked me the loudest at the party, was the head of marketing at Summit Innovations, a position she got because I allowed it. Angela, who joked about how embarrassing it would be to have a husband like me, ran HR for the company, but I had the emails proving she covered up harassment complaints. Greg and Scott, who clinked their glasses in agreement when Tom toasted to Sophia's upgrade, were executives at Tom's company, which meant their careers depended on my decisions. And now they were hours away from learning the truth. By 9 o'clock in the morning, they would walk into their offices, completely unaware that their fates had already been sealed. Melissa would find herself locked out of her corporate email, blindsided by a financial audit that would expose her fraudulent expense reports. Angela would receive a notice of termination, citing her mismanagement and ethical violations. Greg and Scott would be called into a meeting where they would face the consequences of their falsified sales figures and insider dealings. And Tom, he would get a call from his board of directors informing him that his financial backing had been pulled. By the end of the day, his company would be on the verge of collapse. And Sophia? Well, Sophia would be in for the biggest shock of them all. I sat at my desk, the dim glow of my computer screen illuminating the files I had compiled over the years, financial reports, surveillance footage, emails filled with incriminating evidence. I had been patient. I had played the long game, and now I was ready to set it all in motion. I glanced at the clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 hours until their world burned. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about justice, about reclaiming the life that had been stolen from me piece by piece through arrogance and deceit. They thought they had won. They thought they were untouchable. They thought I was beneath them. Tomorrow they'd finally see the truth. I wasn't just their equal. I was their boss. And I was done playing nice. There's a unique kind of satisfaction in watching someone walk confidently toward their own downfall, unaware that every step they take is leading them closer to the edge of a cliff. That's exactly what was happening. I sat in the back of a black town car, sipping my coffee as we pulled up to Summit Innovations headquarters, my company, my empire, the kingdom that none of them knew I ruled. I could already see them arriving, completely oblivious. Melissa, the loudest of the bunch, stepped out of her sleek luxury sedan, her heels clicking against the pavement as she strutted toward the glass doors. She adjusted her designer coat, balancing her phone between her ear and shoulder, probably barking orders at her team. Greg and Scott arrived together, laughing as they exited their car, looking relaxed, probably discussing golf or some new scheme to boost their quarterly numbers without actually doing any real work. Angela followed, walking with purpose, flipping through a folder, probably preparing for some HR meeting where she'd pretend to care about employee concerns while covering up another scandal. And then there was Tom, Sophia's perfect husband, the man who had openly mocked me just hours ago. He stepped out of his black Mercedes like he owned the world, ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, adjusted his tailored suit, and exchanged a few self-important words with Greg and Scott before heading inside. They thought it was just another Monday morning at work. They had no idea what was waiting for them. I checked my watch, 8:45 in the morning, 15 minutes. I took another slow sip of my coffee. Instead of walking through the grand front entrance like they did every morning, I took a different route, the private entrance I had built into the building's design years ago. Security nodded at me as I stepped in. My assistant, Sarah, was already waiting for me in the control room, where monitors displayed live feeds from across the building. She glanced up from her tablet and smirked. "Owned right on schedule." I nodded, setting my coffee down. "Everything in place?" She handed me a folder of finalized documents, termination notices, out ET reports, security logs. "Melissa is on the 10th floor in a budget review meeting," she said. "Angela is prepping for a disciplinary hearing. Ironic, isn't it? Greg and Scott are in their usual Monday morning check-in, and Tom is in his office, working on some last-minute deal." I smirked. "Not for long." Sarah tapped her screen. "Teat has locked them out of their accounts. The moment you walk in, they'll be completely cut off." I took a deep breath, straightened my tie, and checked my watch again. 8:59 in the morning. Time to put an end to the charade. I stepped into the elevator, pressing the button for the executive floor. As I reached the top, I could already hear the first signs of panic. Melissa was standing in front of her assistant's desk, her voice sharp and irritated. "What do you mean I'm locked out of my email?" "Reset the damn password," the assistant stammered, looking nervous. I can't, ma'am. It says your credentials have been revoked." Melissa's face twisted in frustration. "Revoked? By who? I run this damn department." I strode past her, heading toward the conference room. She barely noticed me, too wrapped up in her own unraveling reality. Angela stormed out of the HR office, her face flushed. "Tenno authorized a company-wide audit without notifying me first?" She snapped at a lower-level HR rep. Greg and Scott were standing near the glass windows, whispering nervously as they checked their phones. Their accounts were probably frozen, and their creative accounting tricks had been exposed. And Tom was in his office, pacing in front of his desk, his jaw clenched as he listened to someone shouting through the phone. I already knew what he was hearing. His investors were pulling out, his deals were collapsing, his entire business, built on a foundation of arrogance and borrowed power, was crumbling beneath him, and he still didn't know why. Not yet. I walked slowly, taking my time, enjoying the weight of the moment. Every panicked voice, every confused whisper, every executive who had spent years looking down on me, mocking me, thinking they were untouchable, now scrambling, realizing their security was an illusion, my illusion. Sarah met me near the boardroom door. "They're inside," she said quietly, handing me a tablet with a real-time feed of the room. Tom was at the head of the table, frustrated, gripping the edge of the desk as he spoke. Melissa was frantically flipping through documents, probably trying to find some legal loophole to save herself. Angela looked shaken, her usual confidence gone. Greg and Scott were whispering urgently, glancing toward the door. They could feel it. They didn't know what was happening, but they knew something was very, very wrong. I checked my watch, 9 o'clock in the morning sharp. "Time to go." Sarah gave me a nod. "It's all yours." I pushed the doors open and stepped inside. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to me. Tom frowned. "Daniel?" "The hell are you doing here?" Melissa's face twisted in irritation. "Oh, this is a private meeting." Angela scoffed. "Oh, you're not even supposed to be on this floor." I didn't sit down. I didn't rush. I walked to the head of the table, my seat, and took my time before speaking. And then, with perfect calmness, I looked them all in the eyes and said, "Son, I'm Daniel Carter, CEO of Summit Innovations." I let the words hang in the air, watching as realization slowly sank in. Tom's jaw tightened. Melissa's confidence shattered. Angela blinked in disbelief. Greg and Scott paled. I leaned forward slightly, my voice calm, deliberate, deadly. "And, as of this morning, you're all fired." The moment the game changed, silence followed. Not the awkward silence of an uncomfortable moment, not the confused silence of people unsure what to say. No, this was something else entirely. This was the silence of people realizing for the first time that they were no longer in control, that they had never been, that everything, their careers, their reputations, their power, had always belonged to someone else, to me. I smiled, just a little. Let the fun begin. You never really understand power until you watch people realize they have none. The moment I said those words, the room turned into a freeze frame of shock. Tom, the man who had mocked me the night before, the man who thought he had replaced me, the man who believed he was superior in every way, stared at me like he had just seen a ghost. Melissa blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing as if her brain was still trying to process what she had just heard. Angela's hand tightened around her pen, her face shifting from confusion to disbelief. Greg and Scott exchanged frantic glances, their carefully built personas cracking under the weight of reality. I let them sit in it. I let them marinate in the silence, their perfect little world crumbling in real time. Tom recovered first, or at least he tried to. He let out a forced laugh, leaning back in his chair, trying to mask his growing panic with arrogance. "And this is a joke, right?" he said, his voice carrying that same smugness he had used at the party, though now it wavered ever so slightly. "Sophia put you up to this." I tilted my head slightly, watching him, amused. "Foi you tell me." I tapped my tablet and the large monitors on the walls lit up. And that's when everything truly fell apart, exposing the lies. The first screen showed Summit Innovations' official incorporation documents, with my name in bold print, Daniel Carter, founder and CEO. Melissa's face drained of color as the next screen appeared. Expense reports, dozens of fraudulent charges made under her name, personal trips disguised as business meetings, luxury shopping sprees covered under company retreats. Her hands gripped the edge of the table, her breath shaky. Angela's file came next, a log of harassment complaints she had buried, emails where she had threatened employees who dared to speak up. Her lips parted in disbelief, but she had no words. Greg and Scott's screens followed, falsified quarterly reports, performance bonuses they had inflated by manipulating sales numbers. Tom's screen was the worst of them all, a series of financial transactions showing just how much his business was propped up by Summit Innovations resources, how every deal he had made was approved by me, how his entire career was nothing but a lie. I watched as the truth settled into them like poison. Melissa was the first to break the silence. This isn't real," she whispered. I tilted my head slightly, almost feeling sorry for her. Almost. "Do you want me to pull up the receipts?" I asked smoothly. "Oh, because I have those too." Angela turned to Tom, panicked. "Tell me you knew about this," she hissed. But Tom, who had spent the last year bragging about how powerful he was, how he had built something Sophia could be proud of, looked like a man who had just realized his house was built on sand. His fingers clenched into fists on the table. "How the hell is this possible?" he demanded, his voice sharp with anger.
This company isn't yours?"
I finished for him. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table, my voice calm, steady, unwavering. "No, Tom, it never was." Security entered the room right on cue, standing by the door. "Oh, you can't be serious," Greg muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. I simply smiled. I am." And then, with a final tap on my tablet, the termination notices appeared on the monitors, one by one, signed, sealed, finalized. Melissa shot up from her chair. "You can't do this," she shrieked. Angela followed suit, her voice shaking. "This is wrongful termination," she spat. We have rights, we'll sue." I met her panicked gaze, my expression unreadable. "For what?" I asked. "For getting caught?" Greg and Scott sat frozen, realization settling into them like a death sentence. And Tom, the man who had mocked me so freely, the man who had sat in his mansion and ridiculed me in front of his friends, he simply stared, because he knew. He had lost. I straightened my suit, adjusted my cuffs, and looked each of them in the eye. "And spent years thinking you were untouchable," I said, laughing at the people below you, taking what you didn't earn, thinking no one would ever stop you. I picked up my tablet again, tapped a few keys. You were wrong." I turned to security. "Escort them out." The guards stepped forward. Angela tried to fight it, hissing threats under her breath. Melissa looked stunned, her entire world crashing down around her. Greg and Scott slumped in their seats, defeated. And Tom didn't move at first. He just stared at me, his hands gripping the table so tightly his knuckles went white. Then, slowly, he stood. He fixed his tie, straightened his posture, and looked at me with pure venom in his eyes. "This isn't over," he said, his voice cold. I simply smiled. "It is for you." The guards moved in, and just like that, the mighty had fallen. The aftermath was swift. As the doors slammed shut behind them, Silence settled over the boardroom, the empty chairs, the abandoned files, the remnants of a legacy built on arrogance and deception, gone in a matter of minutes. I exhaled slowly, rolling my shoulders back. Sarah walked in a few seconds later, her tablet in hand. "Well," she said, raising an eyebrow, "that was satisfying." I smirked, grabbing my coffee, but I never saw IT coming. She chuckled, flipping through her notes. "All executive accounts have been revoked. It is scrubbing their emails now." "Well," I nodded. "Good. Make sure legal is prepared in case any of them try to retaliate." Sarah smirked. "With the evidence we have, they don't stand a chance." I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the moment sink in. For years they had laughed at me, underestimated me, belittled me. Now they had nothing left. And Tom would go home to Sophia, and she would have to explain to him why she had left the man who actually built everything she had ever wanted. I checked my watch, 11 o'clock in the morning. And the day was just getting started. You never truly see a person's character until they've lost everything. As security led Tom, Melissa, Angela, Greg, and Scott out of the boardroom, the entire floor fell eerily silent. Employees who once feared and obeyed them now watched in stunned disbelief, whispering amongst themselves as the so-called executives of Summit Innovations were escorted like criminals. Tom, still trying to hold on to his pride, straightened his tie and walked as if he still had power, but his eyes betrayed him. Fury, panic, humiliation. Melissa, usually full of fake confidence, was muttering to herself, her face twisted in pure rage. Angela was on the verge of tears, still trying to convince the security team this was all a mistake. Greg and Scott looked like ghosts, completely defeated, as if the weight of reality had crushed them in minutes. I followed behind at a slow, deliberate pace, my expression unreadable. I wasn't just watching them leave, I was watching everything they had built on lies collapse around them. As they passed through the halls, I could see it, the way employees reacted. Some stood in shock, others in thinly veiled amusement, but most looked relieved. They knew. They had endured the tyranny of these executives for years, the favoritism, the corruption, the blatant abuse of power. And now they were seeing justice unfold in real time. A woman from accounting, Emma, I think her name was, whispered to her coworker, "Tin, I told you something was off with Melissa." One of the IT guys muttered under his breath, "Ain't Angela getting fired?" Finally. As we reached the main entrance, Tom suddenly stopped walking. He turned to face me, his hands clenched into fists. "You set this up," he growled, his voice low and furious. I raised an eyebrow. "You think?" Melissa spun around, pointing a manicured finger at me. "This isn't over," she snapped. "Do you think you can just rip everything away from us?" I smirked, slipping my hands into my pockets. "Tainted Melissa, everything you had was mine to begin with. You just didn't know it." She huffed in disbelief, shaking her head. Angela let out a bitter laugh, her voice breaking. "And you were sitting at those dinner parties the whole time, listening to us laugh at you, and you let it happen." I shrugged. "Would you have believed me if I had told you the truth?" Silence, because they all knew the answer, no. They had been too blinded by their own arrogance, too drunk on their illusion of power, to ever consider the possibility that the man they looked down on owned them. Tom took a step forward, his jaw tight. "It just made the biggest mistake of your life." I tilted my head. "How so?" "You think you can ruin us and get away with it?" he spat. "And I have connections, investors, people who—" I cut him off, my voice casual. "Oh, you mean the investors who just pulled out of your company this morning? Or the legal team who just discovered that your financial records have been flagged for fraud?" His face darkened, but I wasn't finished. I took a calm step closer, my voice dropping. "Oh, or are you talking about Sophia?" I asked, watching as his eyes flickered with something unreadable. "She's going to love explaining to you why she left the man who built everything she ever wanted." Tom's entire body tensed, but he had no comeback, because he knew I was right. Security opened the doors, leading them outside. Tom glared at me one last time, his face twisting in hatred. "This isn't over," he repeated, voice filled with venom. I smiled. "Yes, it is." And with that, they were gone. The moment the doors closed, the room burst into hushed whispers. Sarah, my right-hand executive, walked up beside me, holding her tablet. "Well," she said, glancing toward the door, since that was dramatic. I smirked. "And they had IT coming." She nodded, scrolling through her notes. "Legal has processed their terminations. It has wiped their access. Security has cleared their offices. Everything went smoothly." I turned toward her. "Any retaliation attempts?" She smirked. Melissa tried calling a few employees, but their company numbers were deactivated." Greg and Scott attempted to reach out to competitors, but she tapped her screen. Then our non-compete contracts make that impossible. I nodded. On good. They weren't just jobless, they were powerless. No company would touch them after today, not with the financial and legal records I had in my arsenal. They were blacklisted before they even had a chance to fight back. And Tom, he was going to walk into a nightmare when he got home. I checked my watch, 11:30 in the morning. Sophia was probably already hearing the news, and soon enough, she'd be calling. I turned back toward the office. Every pair of eyes was on me now. For years, I had let them believe I was just Sophia's washed-up ex-husband. Now they saw me for what I really was, their boss. I stepped forward, my voice calm but firm. For those of you wondering, I said, addressing the employees, Summit Innovations isn't collapsing. If anything, today is the beginning of a new era. Silence. I continued. So you've all worked under a leadership that valued connections over competence, manipulation over merit. That ends today. People exchanged glances, some nodding, others still stunned. I could see relief in their eyes. Melissa's reign, Angela's intimidation tactics, Greg and Scott's schemes, Tom's false empire, all reduced to dust. I gave them a moment to let it sink in before I finished. And I built this company from the ground up, and from today forward, we're going to run it the way it was always meant to be run. A beat of silence, then applause, not the forced kind, not the corporate politeness kind, but genuine. I nodded once, then turned back toward Sarah. Send out a company-wide email. Let everyone know the restructuring begins today. She grinned. Already done. I glanced one last time at the doors where Tom and his so-called empire had walked out in disgrace. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. The past was finally behind me, and the future was mine to control. It took longer than expected, but by 1:30 in the afternoon, my phone rang. Sophia. I let it ring twice before answering, keeping my voice calm, indifferent. Hello? There was silence at first, then her voice came through, clipped and furious. Daniel, she snapped, what the hell did you do? I leaned back in my chair, staring at the city skyline outside my office. The power dynamic had shifted entirely, and she knew it. And I assume you've heard the news, I said smoothly. Heard the news? She repeated, her voice rising. Tom just came home furious, ranting about how you fired him and half his executive team. Melissa called me crying. Angela is threatening lawsuits. What did you do? I smirked to myself, imagining the scene unfolding at her house. Tom pacing in anger, Melissa spiraling, Angela desperately scrambling for a way out. And cleaned house, I replied simply. She exhaled sharply, clearly trying to keep her temper in check. Well, you can't just ruin people's lives like this. I chuckled, my tone light. But Sophia, you didn't seem too concerned about ruining mine. Silence. And there it was. The moment she realized this wasn't just a business move. This was personal. Her voice softened, shifting to false concern. Daniel, she started, her tone almost condescending. I know you're upset, I get that. But this is extreme. I let out a slow breath, fighting amusement. Upset? I repeated. Sophia, I haven't been upset in a long time. More silence. I continued. And do you really think this is about revenge? You honestly believe I would take down a corporation, terminate contracts, and completely restructure an entire company just because you mocked me? A beat, then softly, you did this for power. Now she was starting to understand. Not for power, I corrected. For control, for justice. She exhaled shakily, and I could hear her moving, likely pacing in frustration. Lied to me. I laughed at that, actually laughed. So I lied to you? I repeated, incredulous. Sophia, you spent our entire marriage treating me like a failure. You let your friends mock me. You let Tom, your perfect husband, believe he was superior to me. You convinced yourself I wasn't worth your time. She didn't respond. Oh, and now, I continued, my voice sharp, and you're realizing that while you were laughing at me, I was setting the stage for your entire world to crumble. Her panic set in. Her breathing was uneven now. To what happens now? She asked, and for the first time there was a slight tremor in her voice. Now, I mused, Tom gets to live with the consequences. No more corporate backing, no more business empire. His investors are gone. His company is collapsing. I let that sink in. And you, Sophia, I continued, pausing for effect. And you get to explain to your husband why the man you thought was a failure just erased everything he built. Silence. She was processing it, trying to figure out how to undo the damage, but there was no undoing this. The shift in her tone came next. Her voice changed, no longer angry, no longer mocking, but something else. "Daniel," she said slowly. "Oh, let's talk about this in person." I smirked, shaking my head. "Why?" I asked. "So you can convince me to back down? So you can find a way to manipulate the situation?" She hesitated. "No," she said quickly. I need to see you. I need to understand what happened." Now it was her turn to lie. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my desk. "You want to see me?" I asked, letting my voice drop to something almost cruel. "Yes." I let the silence drag out before I spoke. "No." A sharp inhale from her end. "No?" she echoed. "No, Sophia," I said coldly. "I'm not interested in hearing your explanations. I don't care about your confusion. You lost. Accept it." She was quiet for so long that for a moment I thought she had hung up. Then softly, "I never meant to hurt you." I laughed again. "Sophia, you never meant to get caught." Another long pause, then with one final breath she whispered, "Goodbye, Daniel," and the line went dead. I set my phone down, exhaling deeply. She was smart enough to know when she was defeated, and that was satisfying. Sarah knocked lightly on the door, stepping in with a knowing look. "She called?" she asked. I nodded. "She called." I exhaled. "She understands now." Sarah smirked. "Bone good." She handed me a folder. "Financial reports are finalized. Company morale is up. Employees are relieved that they're gone." I skimmed through it, nodding. "Tom?" I asked. Sarah grinned. "Still spiraling. His company is expected to file for bankruptcy within the month." I let that information sink in, feeling lighter than I had in years. Everything was exactly as it should be. I had reclaimed my company, my dignity, my power. And Sophia, she was just another mistake I had corrected. I leaned back in my chair, gazing at the city. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. And I had no regrets. There's a certain peace that comes after a storm. After years of playing the long game, of waiting, planning, watching, the weight that had sat on my chest for years was finally gone. Tom was out of the picture. Melissa, Angela, Greg, and Scott were ruined. Sophia, she was probably still reeling, trying to make sense of how her life had unraveled overnight. But me, I wasn't dwelling on the past anymore. I was moving forward, and so was Summit Innovations. Stepping out of the shadows for 8 years, I had been the invisible force running this company, letting others take credit for my success while I stayed behind the scenes. That was over. I wasn't just retaking my company, I was rebuilding it, better, stronger, untouchable. By the next morning, Summit Innovations was already shifting. Sarah stood beside me, reviewing the first steps of the restructuring process. "The fallout is still rippling," she said, flipping through her tablet. "Its employees are still in shock, but they're also hopeful." I glanced at her. "Hopeful?" She nodded. "Well, you didn't just remove bad executives, Daniel. You removed the people who are holding this company back. Employees are talking. They're saying this is the best thing that could have happened." I smiled slightly. "Good, that was the goal." Melissa, Angela, Greg, Scott, and Tom had spent years abusing their power, silencing innovation, stifling real progress while taking all the credit. Now, the people who had actually done the work, the real talent in this company, had a chance to thrive. The leadership shakeup was the first major move, appointing new leadership. I wasn't going to replace corruption with more of the same. Sarah handed me a list of internal candidates, people who had been overlooked for years because they weren't part of the inner circle Melissa and her crew had cultivated. "These are the ones worth considering," she said. "Son, I personally vetted them." I skimmed through the list. Anne Ramirez, a brilliant mind from accounting who had been sidelined for promotions because she refused to play politics. Jordan Miller, a tech developer who had come up with one of our most successful software updates but never got recognition for it. Lisa Chong, an HR professional who had spent years fighting against the toxic work culture Angela created but had been shut down at every turn. These were the people who deserved a seat at the table. I circled their names, to promote them immediately. Sarah grinned. "Already ahead of you." By noon, the entire company had heard the news. Emails went out, meetings were held. The energy in the building felt different, lighter, charged with something that had been missing for years, optimism. I took a walk through the different departments, something I hadn't done in a long time. Employees who had once been timid, afraid of speaking out, now looked relieved. A junior analyst stopped me near the tech department, hesitant at first. "Sir?" I turned to him. "Yes?" His eyes darted to the side before he gathered the courage to speak. "Thank you," he said, "for getting rid of them. You don't know how much it means." I smiled. "I know exactly how much it means." He nodded quickly and walked away, looking more confident than before. That was the effect of real leadership. When people trusted the person at the top, they worked harder, smarter, better. And that was exactly what I wanted for Summit Innovations. While internal morale was improving, the next concern was external perception. Clients had undoubtedly heard the news. I had expected some hesitation, but to my surprise, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Sarah walked into my office, holding a new report. "One, we just got word from our biggest client," she said, her expression unreadable. "And?" I asked, preparing for bad news. She handed me the report. "They're doubling their contract with us." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, doubling?" She smirked. Senente said, and I quote, "If the company is under Daniel Carter's leadership, we have full confidence in its future." I exhaled, setting the report down. That was a major win. "Backlash?" I asked. "Some," she admitted, "but it's mostly from people who were directly benefiting from Tom and his crew." "The rest of the industry? They're watching us closely, but they're intrigued." I nodded. "So good. Let them watch. Let them see what happens when you run a company the right way." Of course, while Summit Innovations was thriving, Tom was not. By mid-afternoon, reports were already circulating about his company's decline. His stock was plummeting, his investors were abandoning ship, his company, his entire identity was unraveling. Sarah slid her tablet across my desk. "His bankruptcy filings are being prepped." I leaned back, watching the reports roll in. One decision, one exposure of the truth had toppled him completely. Poetic. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, as I was reviewing the final restructuring plans, my phone rang again. Sophia. I debated whether to ignore it, but curiosity won. I answered, "Yes." She hesitated, then softly, "Daniel, I made a mistake." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. I had expected this. She had spent years convinced she had made the right choice, that Tom was the better option, that she had traded up. Now she was realizing she had lost everything. "You did," I said simply. She let out a shaky breath. "Can we talk?" I stared at my desk, considering, then I chuckled. "No, Daniel, please." I cut her off. "You made your choice, Sophia. You left. You laughed at me. You let your friends humiliate me. And now that everything's fallen apart, you think you can come back?" Silence, then a broken whisper. "Was any of it real?" That caught me off guard. I hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "Maybe," I admitted, "but it doesn't matter anymore." And with that, I hung up. Sophia was just another mistake I had outgrown. As the sun set over the city, I leaned back in my chair, feeling lighter than I had in years. The company was in good hands. The toxic leadership was gone. The future was mine to shape. Sarah walked in one last time. "Oh, we did it," she said. I smirked. "Not yet, but we will." She nodded, handing me the final report of the day. "The press is still asking for an interview. They want to know how you pulled off such a flawless corporate takeover." I chuckled. "I'll let the results speak for themselves." I didn't need to be loud about my success. Real power wasn't about showing off, it was about letting people underestimate you until it was too late. And now they all knew the truth. Daniel Carter wasn't just some washed-up ex-husband. He was the man they never saw coming. And he was just getting started. By the time I stepped into my office the next morning, the world was already tearing Tom apart. Headlines were circulating, business blogs dissecting his downfall. Tom Hastings' business empire in free fall. Major investors pull out from Hastings Corp after. CEO shake-up at Summit Innovations. A one-man's fall from grace shook the industry. Everywhere he turned, there was no escape. The people he had relied on, the ones who praised him at networking events, clinked glasses with him at business dinners, were now distancing themselves. No one wanted to be associated with a sinking ship. Sarah walked into my office, tablet in hand, a satisfied smirk on her face. "Oh, he's desperate," she said, sliding the screen toward me. Tom had been making calls all morning, trying to secure funding, trying to salvage whatever he could. No one was answering. His empire had been built on borrowed influence, and now that influence had turned against him. "He's trying to set up a meeting with our former clients," Sarah added. I smirked. Let him try. By the time he made it to the negotiation table, they'd already be under Summit Innovations' new contracts. There was nothing left for him to salvage. At exactly 10:15 in the morning, my phone rang. "Tom." I let it ring twice, 3 times, then finally I answered. "Tom." His voice was tighter, controlled, but there was an edge of desperation beneath it. "Well, I think we should talk," he said. I leaned back in my chair, smirking to myself. "Talk about what?" he exhaled, already frustrated. "Oh, you made your point," he said stiffly. "She won." I stayed silent, letting him continue. "Melissa is blacklisted. Greg and Scott are finished. Angela might never work in HR again. You got what you wanted. I leaned forward slightly, my tone mocking. Tom, I said, sound like a man with nothing left to lose. Silence. Then he snapped, you smug little... He cut himself off, taking a sharp breath. I chuckled. Careful. You might say something you'll regret. Another beat of silence, then his voice turned calculated. What do you want? He asked. There it was. The moment where he realized he had lost. He wanted a way out, a lifeline. I glanced at Sarah, who was watching me with amused anticipation. I tapped my fingers against my desk, pretending to think. Then I said, You want nothing, Tom. Silence. What? I leaned back, my voice calm, satisfied. Ain't I already have everything I want? Another pause, then his voice came through, low, bitter. He go to hell, and he hung up. Sarah snorted. That went well. I shrugged. Did better than expected. Tom was done, and he knew it. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, my phone rang again. Sophia. I debated ignoring it, but something told me this would be the last time she called. I answered, Sophia. She hesitated, then softly, Can we meet? I smirked to myself. Why? I need closure, she said. Closure. Funny. For 8 years she had treated me like a failure, like a man beneath her, someone she could control, manipulate, discard. And now she wanted closure. I exhaled, staring at the city outside my window, then I said, Fine, 1 hour. The cafe near my office. Thank you, Daniel, she said quickly. I hung up. I wasn't doing this for her. I was doing it for me. Sophia was already there when I arrived. She looked different, not in an obvious way. She was still well-dressed, her hair still perfect, her makeup still flawless, but something in her posture, her eyes, the way she held herself. She wasn't the same woman who had laughed at me. She looked small. I sat across from her, watching as she played with her coffee cup, avoiding my gaze. When you wanted to talk, I prompted. She sighed, looking up at me. What happened to us? I raised an eyebrow. Us? She nodded. And at one point, we were happy, weren't we? I studied her, then sighed. And I think we were, I admitted. But happiness doesn't mean respect, and you never respected me, Sophia. She flinched. That's not true, she murmured. I tilted my head. Isn't it? She exhaled. And didn't know. I gave a short laugh. I didn't want to know. You enjoyed believing I was beneath you. Her eyes filled with something, regret, sadness. She looked away. I married Tom because I thought he was everything I wanted, she admitted. Everything I thought you weren't. I smirked. And how's that working out for you? She swallowed hard. He's not who I thought he was. I already knew that. She hesitated. Daniel, I was wrong. I watched her, unmoved. I know, I said simply. She met my eyes. And if I could go back, I held up a hand, stopping her. You can't. She sucked in a breath, looking away again. We sat there, the silence between us thick with history, with words unspoken. Then softly she whispered, Do you still love me? For a moment I didn't answer. Then I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. So I did, I admitted. Once. I let the words sit before I continued. And that love doesn't survive betrayal, Sophia. Her breath hitched, but I wasn't done. And so I spent years letting you think I was nothing, I said. And let you and your friends mock me. I let you believe Tom was better than me. I leaned back, watching as tears welled in her eyes. Oh, now, I continued, now I finally see you for who you are. Her lips parted, but no words came. I sighed, standing up. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, Sophia, I said. She looked up at me, desperate, broken. Daniel, please. But I was already walking away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had finally let go, and I had no regrets. By the end of the week, Tom's company officially collapsed. Melissa Angela had faded into obscurity. Greg and Scott disappeared from the industry. Sophia, she was just another part of my past. And me? I was exactly where I was meant to be, running my company, building something stronger. And for the first time in years, I was truly free. This wasn't just revenge. This was justice. And it was the perfect ending.